I first read Stephen Fry's The Ode Less Travelled about 4 years ago, give or take, and I absolutely adored it. I should point out that I was a literature student, I have a literature degree, I specialised quite a bit in poetry, so I'm a big fan of poetry, and this book is without a doubt the best book on poetry I have ever read. Poetry in general. There are books about, for example, Lord Byron that I love more than this, but this explains everything you could possibly want to know about poetry, kind of in bite sized ways, because it's not the largest book, but it does cover everything well enough to get a basic understanding of things. But it explains it in a way that if you've never studied poetry, if you're really new to poetry as a form, it's very easy to digest what Stephen Fry is saying and to get a general understanding of what he is talking about. And it's split into four main sections. The first is meter, which I love. It breaks it down into iambic pentameter and enjambment, and explains the difference between beats, and really gives you a feel for the different kinds of meter. And really, meter for me is my favorite thing about poetry. I know that some people prefer rhyme, and this book does have a section on rhyme, quite extensively, of course, and it looks at different kinds of rhyme. But for me, meter, when I'm reading poetry out loud, meter is what draws me to certain poems. There are certain meters that just don't gel with me as much as others. A poem without any clear meter is not one that I'm going to take to very readily. There are exceptions, but generally I like a very steady meter, and I like a good rhyme as well. The rhyme section is, I guess, a little bit shorter than the meter section because usually people are aware of rhyme before they're aware of meter. And it also looks at form, the different kinds of poems, what a stanza is, what makes up a ballad, of course, what is an ode, and looks at the different kinds of poems, which is probably my second favourite kind of thing. So I'd say I favoured the type of meter, and then the form, and then the rhyme. I don't ever mind if a poem doesn't rhyme, but certainly it helps a lot. And then it looks at diction and how to find your poetic voice, and I was going to say what it takes to be a poet, but that seems restrictive. I guess what the poetic process is like is a better way to say it, and the different factors that generally you need to consider. In true Stephen Fry style, it is quite funny. Not all of the way through, it's not hilarious, but it's quite quick witted when it needs to be, and if he's talking about quite a heavy subject, if something's kind of dry and a little bit more intense, there is a lot of humour peppered throughout it to make it easier to read. There are, of course, examples and encouragements to work out the meter and to practice beats and things, and I absolutely adore it. If you're a fan of poetry, you will love this. It's as simple as that. You will absolutely adore it. There are examples of Stephen Fry's own poems, of other poems throughout this. It's very practical when there's room for that. And if you're completely new to poetry and you want to learn about it, this is a perfect place to start. Obviously, it does look at the history of poetry here and there where it's relevant to talk about different forms or when certain meters came into play, because obviously there are trends with poetry, as there is with any kind of literature. So you will get some kind of background, but it's not going to be the history of poetry. It's more about the form, the meter, the rhyme. But that is peppered throughout. Really, truly adored it. Absolutely love it. Not just one of my favourite books on poetry, but one of my favourite books ever. I'm a big fan of Stephen Fry's writing style. I've read 70% of what he has written. There are still a few more. I've got Paperweight on my to be read pile, and I think there are maybe two or three others. But I love his writing style. The Ode Less Travelled is my favourite thing he has written. One of my favourite books ever. I absolutely love it. If you're a fan of poetry, give it a go. I think you'll love it. If you're new to poetry, it's a pretty fantastic way to get a snapshot overview of all of the different facets of poetry, with some history peppered throughout and some good humour as well. I truly adored The Ode Less Travelled, and I'm pretty confident you will too.